Welcome to another edition of Ecosphere. I am Mary Kanu. President Bola Tinubu says he is not unmindful of the rising cost of food and its effects on the pocket of citizens, and declared a state of emergency on food security in the country to ensure that the most vulnerable are supported. Now, this news has been met with various reactions from farmers and agro-enthusiasts who said the decision by the president has been a long time coming. The president also directed the immediate release of fertilizers and grains to farmers and households to mitigate the effects of the subsidy removal. He also directed that all matters pertaining to food and water availability and affordability as essential livelihood items were included within the purview of the National Security Council. Now, President Tinubu says the Central Bank of Nigeria will continue to play a role of funding the agricultural value chain, and revenue from food and agricultural exports would be increased. Now, how exactly are farmers and agro-enthusiasts responding to this development? Let's hear directly from Julius Oga, an agro-enthusiast. Thank you very much for joining me on the program. Now, I must ask you first, when you heard the news of the president's declaration of a state of emergency on food security, what was your first reaction?
I would say I wasn't particularly excited. I was a little bit of optimistic. I would say that at the same time I wasn't surprised. Don't forget that this state of emergency thing on agriculture has it really needs to be taken more seriously than political pronouncements. And if you cast your mind back, late President Umar Musa Yar'Adua had a 7-point agenda, one of which was particularly about food security. His immediate successor, Goodluck Jonathan, didn't quite follow closely on the 7-point agenda of President Umar Musa Yar'Adua. But you recall that on assumption of office again, President Muhammadu Buhari declared that agriculture was one of his key priorities that he was going to tackle. So, like I started off saying, I am not particularly surprised. Let's just say because of President Bola Tinubu's antecedents, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt.
Are you confident of a change in the agricultural sector based off of President Tinubu's declaration of a state of emergency? Are you positive or confident of a change going forward?
Oh, okay. I am not exactly very confident. Going by precedents, not President Tinubu's precedents, but our precedents as a country, we make the right declaration and give it to him. President Tinubu has made the right declaration. But what are we seeing in terms of action? What is unfolding in the background to see that the state of emergency he has declared is actually functional and brings into reality the goals he wants to achieve? We're not seeing much of that. That is what is making me not so confident. But then, like I said, I am cautiously optimistic. We are already in the middle of August, the heart of the farming season. So, and you know that in agriculture, in our sector, even though the state of emergency declares that it wants to see farming no longer being a seasonal thing, it wants to see farming being a continuous process. We're already in the middle of August. Like I started off saying, we still, I am cautiously optimistic. So given who the personality and capacity of the president is, I still want to give him the benefit of the doubt. This would be a long-term process. It will be something that will unfold over time. So we may not be able to see the results of that declaration tomorrow or even in another 2 or 3 months' time. But we want to see action. We want to see the government going into action with all the partners, all the stakeholders, to see that this thing does not just become a political statement as has happened with many other administrations.
All right. Yeah. Since you mentioned famine, we know that despite the president's declaration, farmers are affected by insecurity in Nigeria. We've heard stories of farmers being killed on their farmlands. So, do you agree that if the issue of insecurity is not addressed, then the president's declarations will just remain mere words?
Yeah, it's quite a yes and no answer, my sister. If I would directly agree that yes, if insecurity is not addressed, then the declaration of a state of emergency could just have been an effort in nullity. But give or take, you know that our farmers, Nigerian farmers, really don't depend. The subsistence farmer, the rural dweller, doesn't depend on government policies and government actions, which is quite fortunately what continues to help to sustain the economy and the agricultural sector as well. They will go on, they will struggle within their own means to provide what they can provide within the limit of what is available to them, but that does not remove the burden of responsibility on the government, that they must ensure that security is addressed. And President Tinubu, in declaring that emergency, has also made a declaration that they would ensure that people can go to their farms and do what they have to do, and be confident that they will not be attacked or hacked down by marauders. But again, it's a statement. We want to see it actually working, especially in many regions of the north and the north central, which are the core agricultural production areas of our country. Yes, if security is not addressed, then we've only made a statement of intention.
All right. Since we're talking about farmers, at that level of rural farming is where we have the major work, the production of food. Now, these are the people, that's the farmers, the rural farmers. These are the people who toil to sow and harvest. Do you see these rural farmers benefiting from the president's promises, like the release of fertilizers and grains?
The rural farmers have never waited on the government or its policies or the inputs supplied by government or fertilizers or seeds or whatever to continue to produce food. And that is the most fortunate thing we enjoy as a country. If the inputs we're getting to them, I believe the results will be significantly different. The result in terms of output and quantity and volume of food production will be significantly different. But when policies are made and in between it develops into an industry of middlemen, when government says it wants to provide subsidized fertilizers to people, to the rural farmers, a crop of middlemen suddenly emerge. When they say they want to give grains to sellers at subsidized prices, again, quickly a crop of middlemen emerge who hijack those processes, turn it into personal enterprise and advantage for themselves, and the farmer is left hanging dry, hanging by their tails. This is most unfair, and I am hoping that this state of emergency declared by the government would help, more access to those people who actually need those inputs, not the merchants who ambush these things midway and turn them into private enterprise, leaving people, paying even more for what they initially would have paid for in the open markets when what they actually gotten is supposed to be subsidized from government channels. And again, I'll revert to what I said in my previous response. We are fortunate that they have hardly ever had to wait for these inputs to come to them. They go out and plow on their own strength and pull from their own resources in order to give us what we are able to get. I hope they don't relent in that. And I do hope that while they are struggling at it, help comes to them from the government, support comes to them so that there will be more output in terms of food production. I
All
hope I
right.
answered your question,
Well, you
but
have,
I
and at
must
this
tell you
point, yes,
sincerely.
you have. You have clearly answered the question, but at this point, we'll have to take a break. Let's go on a short break. The program will be back shortly. Stay with us. Welcome back to the program. We're still speaking about the President's declaration of a state of emergency on food security and how farmers can directly benefit from this declaration. Agroenthusiast Julius Oga is still here with us. Now, if you can hear me, the President said 500,000 hectares of land have been mapped out. Where these lands are, we would probably find out soon enough. But, getting lands would require a level of collaboration with state governments. And this is important to increase production. Do you see the collaboration between the state and federal government happening, and how, bearing in mind the outcome of past collaboration between states and the federal government?
Okay, collaboration in itself is something very good, and it helps, like they say, two heads are better than one. So collaboration is a positive development. But in reality, I don't know what we are collaborating in agriculture is about. And this is what I am trying to say. The state governments are not maximizing their own strength and resources for food production. Do you mean collaboration for federal government and state government to have a rice farm? We should be collaborating towards industrialization and towards the maximizing the agro value chain. And let me explain what I mean. If, for instance, the federal government comes in and say, okay, we're setting up a cocoa industry, and you go to the cocoa producing states and say, okay, give us XYZ metric tons of cocoa. That is the kind of collaboration I'm thinking about. Not a collaboration in a conference table or in boardrooms, not just talking about it as a bureaucracy. We should see states investing their own resources, especially now that they are getting more allocation from the federation account because subsidy in oil has been removed. States are getting more allocation. They should set up cottage industries. They should maximize production, agricultural production within their own states. And then they can now leverage with the strength of the federal government to say, okay, Adamawa State has 1,000 metric tons of corn. Federal government, please, we want an export market. Help us to make a deal with other countries so we can export our corn. That's the kind of collaboration we should be thinking about. Not the collaboration of commissioners and ministers of agriculture sitting down on a round table to just talk. Agriculture is not a bureaucracy. Agriculture is a practical thing, and we want to see it work. So if they must collaborate, they should be collaborating on the basis of economics of scale. What can we get if we pool our resources from 36 states and from the federal government? What can we make of this sector? And then on their own, the states should not dwell on, waiting for the federal government to come, give you revenue. They should strive to begin to make their own revenue, and they can do that with agriculture. There's no reason why the middle belt of this country does not have agro-processing industry, cottage industry to employ youth. That is the kind of collaboration we should be thinking about. And about 500,000 hectares of land, yes, based on the land tenure system and the land reforms, I think they can collaborate in that respect. But the federal government could as well just encourage the states to use the lands within their borders and do what they can do, maximize production on those lands, and not to think of boardroom meetings when they talk about collaboration, because that is what crosses my mind, and I think it's an insult to the intelligence of many of us who are agricultural enthusiasts.
Well, All right, you mentioned that you do not see the need for the collaboration being initiated by the federal government, but part of the thoughts, part of the declarations of the federal government is for a strong collaboration between the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Water Resources. So I'm asking, do you not see this collaboration between the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Water Resources as a means to fast-track the food production process?
Okay, yeah. I quite don't even see any significant reason why the ministries of water resources and the Ministry of Agriculture are operating, side by side. I am thinking based on the nature of the sector, they could actually, those ministries could actually be merged, and that way you could get the best of input if the water resources element of it is considered towards maximizing agro productivity. Water resources is relevant to fish production, is relevant to irrigation farming, it's even relevant to curbing desert encroachment, and is very, very critical to environmental climate change, if I may put it that way. So the need for both ministries to work together, if they are not merged, hoping that the Tinubu administration sees reason why they should, come together into one ministry. If they continue to work side by side alternately, there's every reason why the Ministry of Water Resources, for instance, should begin to think seriously about water supply first for domestic consumption. What do I mean? If there is enough water, potable water in the economy, in the country, in most of our major cities, even urban residents will be encouraged to have gardens close to their houses because they can water those gardens and produce vegetables. That's how most countries of the world encourage cottage farming enterprises. You could just have bags of sand in your compound, have a small ridge in your compound, plant crops, vegetables like tomatoes, simply because you could water them. If you look at this on a larger scale, you now see how critically important water is to agriculture. So you can look at it and think of, okay, if you have a river basin area where there is supply of water from a dam or whatever water source is close by, it is to the benefit of the agro sector, and it helps the economics of scale, and it helps in enhancing the agricultural value change in the long run. So such a collaboration is very important. But if you ask me, my last word on this is that there's no reason why water resources and agricultural ministries are operating alternately. They should be brought together as one. There's no reason why those sectors should be operating as bureaucracies. There's no reason why people should sit down and be discussing those things in boardrooms instead of, having engineers and practical people trying to make things work. There's no reason why we don't have more dams in this country, more functional dams than we already have, which would already form river basin areas, agro basin areas, farming, cluster areas, all those farms depending on water for all-round production, like President Tinubu has said he wants to do.
Now,
if he doesn't want farming in Nigeria to be a seasonal affair.
There is a forecast. You were speaking about water, and I said there's a forecast that the country will witness more rainfalls and flooding. Now, we saw what happened in Nigeria in 2022 due to the flooding. And now, how do we ensure that the federal government's efforts and that of farmers do not go to waste?
Okay, I would say that basically we shouldn't always consider excess rainfall and flooding as a disadvantage. And that is not detracting from the fact that it is actually a natural disaster that causes loss of lives and property and even farm estates. Part of the reason why this happens is the way we live as human beings. We live unmindful of our surroundings and environment. And more as these disasters are happening, it has not stopped estate developers and ordinary people from, going into floodplains to set up buildings and farms. We should learn lessons from disasters that happened to us, as happened in 2021. That's on the sideline. The point I was trying to make initially is this: flooding. If you look across the world, most agricultural fertile land areas are on floodplains. The reason is this, and I've said this once or twice on your show or other shows, that it is because the alluvial, the silty soil deposited by flood waters is very, very nutritious for crops. And if you see the grasses on floodplains, the greenery is different from the grass on the upland. And that is why floodplains are very good growth areas for rice. Be that as it may, crops don't like floodwaters, running over them because it deposits disease, mud, and alters the production and chemical processes of the crops themselves. How can we benefit from floodplains, from floods? It's by, you know, channeling water, excess water, into the rivers, desilting the rivers, because we're not desilting the rivers. We're not desilting, I mean dredging the rivers. We're not dredging the rivers. So more and more, the river plains, the river basins are becoming shallow. And so the water is spreading out instead of flowing in a channel. If you take into cognizance, just to give you a mental picture of what I'm talking about, you have a road, you have a drain by the side. The drain is a water channel. Our rivers are supposed to be the natural drains of all our topography. The rivers have become just like the gutter. When the gutter becomes filled up with sand, the water runs on the roads. That's what is happening to our rivers. So our rivers need to be dredged so they can become basins again. They can become water receptacles again. They can contain excess water, and take it right out into the oceans instead of spreading out everywhere and causing excess damage like we see
All
during
right.
floods.
Now,
So what can the government do?
okay.
Is to encourage, is first and foremost to take responsibility. Let the rural basin authorities, let the Ministry of Water Resources take into serious consideration the fact that if we don't dredge the rivers, they will become sandbanks. Over time, they will dry up. Over time, we will lose our aquatic and fishery resources. And over time, we won't have water. And that is a negative impact on agriculture.
Well,
If you don't have water, you don't have the water, underground water channels, even effective, you can't even drill boreholes. They won't be productive. You can't even think of farming. You can't even think of many, many, many advantages that come with it. So
well,
they should
I'm
begin to
afraid
think
I
right
have to
now
cut you
about.
here. We've run out of time. But Agroenthusiast Julius Oga, thank you very much for your time and your contribution. Thank you. Well, that's how much we can take on this edition of the program. Thank you for watching. I am Mary Kanu.